Have you ever wondered what you would do if you found two children freezing to death on the coldest night of Chicago's winter? What could Michael Jordan, one of the greatest legends of world basketball, possibly have in common with an 8-year-old boy living in an abandoned car on the South Side? For decades, a story remained hidden in the silent halls of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The encounter that forever changed a global icon's perspective on the true meaning of success. What really happened that terrible night when a desperate scream echoed through the United Center parking lot? "Sir, my little sister isn't breathing." Why would a man who could have simply gone to his luxurious car decide to stop and risk everything to save two children the world had abandoned? And how did Tommy, a boy who learned to survive on the most dangerous streets of Chicago, end up becoming the inspiration for the creation of an institute that would go on to save hundreds of other lives? Get ready to discover the true story behind Michael Jordan's transformation. Not the legendary athlete we know from the courts, but the man who, on a winter night, decided that some things are more important than safety protocols and global fame. The cutting Chicago wind blew through the cracks of the abandoned car like icy blades, making the rusty metal groan under the weight of the merciless winter. Tommy, an 8-year-old boy with disheveled brown hair and clothes that were once blue but now were just dirty rags, slept curled up in the back seat, hugging his little sister Emma against his thin chest. Her face, pale as the snow beginning to accumulate on the cracked windshield, was covered by a dry cough that echoed in the silence of the night. They had been living in that abandoned Chevrolet on the South Side for 3 months, ever since they lost their mother in an accident that changed their lives forever. The torn seats of the car still held the sweet smell of the cheap perfume their mother used to wear, a cruel reminder that Tommy tried to ignore every night. "Mom always said I had to take care of Emma, no matter what happened, because an older brother protects the younger sibling. I promised her that I would never let anything bad happen to my little sister, even if it cost me my own life." Emma's small body began to shake violently, jolting Tommy from his fragmented sleep filled with nightmares about the day they lost everything. His brown eyes opened immediately, his protective instinct stronger than the extreme exhaustion he felt in his fragile, malnourished child's bones. Emma was having terrible seizures, her 4-year-old little face contorted in an expression of pain that shattered Tommy's heart into 1,000 pieces. She was trying desperately to breathe, but the freezing air seemed unable to reach her small lungs, and a strange, frightening sound came from her throat with each desperate attempt to suck in oxygen. Tommy felt panic rise up his throat like a trapped scream, his small, bruised hands trembling as he held his sister's convulsing body, trying to warm her with the little body heat he still had. "Emma, please, wake up and look at your brother. Don't do this to me. You're all I have in the entire world, the only family I have left. Mom told me to take care of you until she comes back, and I won't let you go too." Without hesitating for a second, Tommy lifted Emma in his fragile arms, feeling her weight much lighter than it should be for a 4-year-old who should be playing and running around the house. She was as cold as a piece of ice taken straight from the freezer, and her breathing had become even more labored, almost non-existent, as if life was slipping away from her with every passing second. With his bare, bruised feet stepping on the frozen asphalt that burned his skin like red-hot iron, Tommy began to run through the deserted streets of the South Side, carrying his little sister as if she were made of the most delicate and precious crystal in the entire world. The streetlights flickered faintly in the dark night, creating eerie shadows that danced around them like mocking ghosts as he ran from door to door, pounding with his small, bruised fists on every entrance he could find. His voice echoed through the empty streets, a desperate cry that cut through the night's silence like a sharp knife. "Please, someone have mercy on two children and help me. My little sister is very sick and needs a doctor right now, before it's too late. She's just an innocent baby who never did anything wrong in this world. Please don't let her die in my arms." The first door Tommy knocked on with desperate force belonged to a small house with windows lit from inside, where a middle-aged woman appeared after a long time, wearing a floral robe and fluffy slippers, clearly irritated at being woken up in the middle of the night. Her eyes widened in shock and disgust when she saw the two dirty, ragged children on her doorstep. Tommy with frozen tears streaming down his thin face, and Emma completely motionless in his trembling arms. The woman's expression quickly shifted from initial shock to fear and then to repulsion, and she began to slowly close the door, avoiding looking directly into Tommy's pleading, desperate eyes that shone with tears of despair. He placed his small knee in the crack of the door, preventing it from closing completely, and begged with all the strength that still remained in his hoarse, broken voice, worn out by the cold and by crying. "Please, ma'am, I beg you in the name of your Christian kindness, my little sister can't breathe properly, and she's cold as ice. She's dying from the cold, and I urgently need help to get her to the nearest hospital. I beg for your mercy. She's just a small, innocent child who never did anything wrong in this cruel world." The woman shook her head forcefully, nervously whispering something about not being able to get involved in street problems because she had her own family to protect, and she slammed the door shut with brutal force, leaving Tommy and Emma alone once again in the cutting, relentless cold of the winter night. The loud sound of the lock turning echoed like a gunshot in the deathly silence of the street, and Tommy felt his small soul shatter a little more, as if each rejection tore a piece from his heart. He kept running through the icy, slippery streets, knocking on 5 more consecutive doors, each cold, cruel rejection cutting deeper into his already wounded, bleeding heart. At a yellow house with a well-kept garden and a white fence, an elderly man in striped pajamas opened just a small crack in the door, observed the children for a few long seconds with a look of disdain, and gruffly muttered that he couldn't help because he had no phone and didn't want any trouble, quickly closing the door right after. Tommy screamed through the closed wood, his voice echoing through the empty street like the wail of a lost soul. Why can't people see that we're just helpless children who desperately need help? Emma didn't choose to be born poor or live on the dirty street. She doesn't deserve to die just because people are afraid of us or see us as human trash. When Tommy stumbled to the convenience store that stayed open 24 hours a day, his hopes reignited like a small, fragile flame struggling against the freezing wind not to be extinguished completely. The shopkeeper, a fat man with a scruffy beard and an apron stained with grease, was organizing products on the shelves when he saw through the window the shadow of the 2 children slowly approaching the illuminated entrance. Tommy banged on the thick glass with desperate force, leaving marks from his small hands stained with dried blood, while Emma remained completely still and silent in his arms, her breathing increasingly weak and irregular, almost imperceptible. The shopkeeper walked heavily to the glass door, but instead of opening it to help the children, he began yelling through the thick glass, making harsh, threatening gestures with his fat hands for them to immediately get away from his property. His voice was harsh and full of irritation and contempt as he shouted through the glass door, spitting out venomous words. "Get out of here right now, you filthy brats! I don't want trouble here with disgusting beggars, and you 2 are the very definition of walking trouble. Go find a public shelter or anywhere far away from my store, because I won't let you scare off my paying customers with that disgusting appearance." Tommy pressed his thin, dirty face against the cold glass, leaving a fogged mark of hot tears and pure despair, while holding fragile Emma with one trembling arm and pounding on the glass door with his other small bruised fist until it bled. He could clearly see the welcoming warmth inside the brightly lit store, the shelves full of food, and the bright lights that created an environment that seemed to belong to a completely different and unreachable world from his own. Emma was getting paler and colder, her small lips taking on a frightening bluish tint that made Tommy's heart race with absolute panic and pure terror. He pleaded through the thick glass, his voice muffled but still laden with genuine despair and unconditional fraternal love. "Please, sir, I beg you for your human compassion. I just need an old coat or anything warm for my little sister. She is literally dying of cold in my arms, and I have absolutely nothing to cover and warm her. I swear on my dead mother's memory that I will leave immediately afterward. Just give me any warm rag to save her life." The shopkeeper made an even more abrupt and violent gesture of total refusal, threatening to call the police immediately if they didn't leave the front of his store within 10 seconds. Tommy felt his small legs buckle from extreme exhaustion and growing despair, but continued to hold Emma with all the strength he still had in his fragile, malnourished body. He looked through the window at the shelves filled with cheap coats, colorful blankets, and warm clothes that could easily save his little sister's precious life, but were completely out of his reach because of his miserable social condition. The cruel injustice of the situation hit Tommy like a brutal punch to his empty stomach, making him bitterly realize that in the cold world of rich adults, two abandoned street children were worth infinitely less than the insignificant profit of a dirty convenience store. He muttered bitter words as he walked away from the window, carrying the weight of the world on his small shoulders. How can there be so many warm and comfortable things in here, and my innocent little sister is dying of cold outside like an abandoned animal? If I were a well-dressed adult with money in my pocket, he would open the door immediately and offer me hot tea. When Tommy finally walked away from the store with faltering steps, carrying Emma, who was now completely silent and frighteningly still, the snow began falling from the dark, threatening sky like frozen tears from angels weeping over the world's injustice. Each icy flake that delicately touched Emma's pale face seemed to suck a little more of the precious life that remained in her. And Tommy realized with absolute horror and total panic that his little sister had completely stopped convulsing. She was too still, too silent, too cold, and when he desperately pressed his ear against her small, fragile chest, he could barely hear the faint, irregular beats of her heart struggling to keep going. Panic took over Tommy in a devastating way he had never experienced before in his 8 years of hard life. A terrible sensation that he was losing forever the only person left from his broken family. His voice rose in a desperate scream that echoed through the empty streets of the night. Emma, my dear little sister, please don't leave me completely alone in this terrible, cruel world. You are my sister from the heart, my only sacred responsibility, my only reason to keep living and fighting. Mom told me before she left that I had to take care of you with my own life, and I cannot fail in this mission now. The snow kept falling more and more intensely from the black sky, quickly covering Tommy's dark, messy hair and creating a white, icy blanket over Emma's small, motionless body, which looked like a broken porcelain doll. Deep down in his desperate heart, Tommy knew he needed to find medical help quickly, or he would lose his beloved little sister forever on that cruel and merciless winter night in Chicago. He looked at the deserted, hostile streets around him, feeling smaller, more lost, and more alone than ever in his short life, but still determined not to give up as long as there was a single thread of hope shining in his heart. Emma was completely motionless and cold in his trembling arms, like a precious porcelain doll that had been broken by cruel hands, and Tommy had to fight with all his strength against the terrible and devastating thought that maybe it was already too late to save the life of the most important person in the world to him. His words came out like a desperate prayer directed at the dark sky. No, I will not accept that my little sister dies like this, abandoned and rejected by everyone. There must be at least one person in this whole city who has a heart big and generous enough to help two innocent children. Emma, my little princess, I solemnly promise that I will find someone to help us, even if I have to knock on every door in Chicago and beg on my knees until my knees bleed. With Emma completely motionless in his arms and the snow falling harder and harder, Tommy began to run desperately through the familiar streets of the South Side, his bare feet slipping on the icy asphalt as he desperately searched for the nearest hospital. He knew every alley, every corner, every shortcut of these streets where he had learned to survive over the past 3 months, and his mind worked quickly to remember the fastest way to the emergency room. Emma hung limp in his arms, her pale little face covered with snowflakes that melted upon touching her cold skin, and Tommy could feel she was getting colder and heavier, as if life was slipping away from her with every passing second. His tears mixed with the snow as he ran, creating icy trails on his thin cheeks, and his breath came out in clouds of vapor. Receptionist Sandra looked at Tommy and Emma with an expression of distaste and irritation, as if she were seeing yet another inconvenient problem on an already difficult night, and sighed deeply before responding in a monotone voice with not a trace of compassion. She didn't even get up from her chair or make any attempt to examine Emma more closely, limiting herself to looking at the two children over her thick glasses with evident contempt. Her words came out cold and bureaucratic, as if she were reciting a memorized script she had used hundreds of times before to dismiss similar cases. Tommy felt his heart sink when he realized she was seeing them exactly like everyone else had that terrible night, as a problem to be discarded instead of human beings desperately in need of help. Look here, kid. I can't do anything for you without official documents and without an adult guardian present. You're clearly just another street case, and we have strict protocols that must be followed before any medical care is authorized. Tommy felt the world collapse around him when he heard these cold, bureaucratic words, and he desperately placed Emma on the counter so the receptionist could clearly see the critical state she was in. Emma was completely motionless. Her skin had taken on a frightening pallor that made her blue veins stand out like delicate drawings, and her lips were nearly purple from the cold. Tommy began speaking rapidly, his words tumbling out in desperation, trying to make the woman understand the gravity of the situation and the urgent medical need Emma represented. He gestured with his small, trembling hands, pointing to his sister's visible symptoms, begging for someone with medical knowledge to at least look at her before making any bureaucratic decisions. Please, Miss Sandra, just look at her. She was having terrible seizures and now she can't even breathe properly. Do you see how she's blue and cold? I don't care about papers or protocols. She needs a doctor now, before it's too late. She's just a small, innocent child who is not to blame for being in this situation. Receptionist Sandra didn't even bother to look properly at Emma, keeping her eyes fixed on the computer screen as if the children were invisible or irrelevant to her work routine. She continued typing mechanically, completely ignoring Tommy's desperate pleas and Emma's obviously critical condition right in front of her. Other hospital staff regularly passed by the desk, but none of them stopped to question the situation or offer any kind of assistance, all seemingly automatically accepting that the two dirty children didn't deserve medical attention. Tommy began to lightly bang on the counter with his fist, trying to get the attention of anyone who might have a shred of human compassion and professional medical integrity. Listen to what I'm saying, please. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking you to do your job, which is to save lives. My sister could be dying while you sit there typing things that aren't more important than a child's life. Finally, receptionist Sandra looked up from the computer with an expression of extreme irritation, as if Tommy were an annoying fly interfering with her important work, and spoke in an even colder, sharper tone than before. She leaned slightly forward, resting her elbows on the desk, and fixed her small, hard eyes on Tommy's, with a look that mixed disdain, exhaustion, and total lack of human empathy. Her words were pronounced slowly and with emphasis, as if she were speaking to someone mentally incapable of understanding simple instructions, and Tommy could feel the cold cruelty behind every syllable that came out of her mouth. The rejection was clear in every word she spoke, and Tommy realized with horror that she had already decided she wouldn't help no matter what he said or did. I've already explained the rules to you, stubborn boy, and they won't change just because you're making a scene here at my desk. No documents, no adult guardian, no fixed address. There's absolutely nothing we can do for the two of you. Those are the hospital and government rules, and I don't have the authority to break them for two underage street kids. At that moment, a tall, burly security guard appeared next to the desk, clearly called by the receptionist to handle what she considered a disruption to hospital order. The man wore a dark uniform with security badges and had a severe, intimidating expression that made Tommy even more nervous and desperate. He looked at the two children with a mixture of pity and professional irritation, like someone who was used to dealing with similar cases and already knew exactly how the situation would be resolved. Tommy looked at the security guard with the last remnants of hope still left in his broken heart, silently begging that he be different from all the other people who had rejected his plea for help that terrible night. Sir, please, can you help my little sister? She really needs a doctor, and these people won't help us because of paperwork. You must have children and know what it's like to love a child. I beg you to help us. The security guard sighed heavily and spoke to Tommy in a tone that tried to be kind, but still maintained the professional firmness necessary to enforce hospital rules without causing further drama or disturbance. He bent slightly to be at Tommy's eye level, an attempt to humanize the interaction that was about to end with yet another rejection. His words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable and helpful, but Tommy could sense that behind the kind facade was the same inflexible determination of all the other adults who had refused to help. The man vaguely gestured toward the exit, clearly indicating that the conversation was over and that the children would have to seek help elsewhere. Look, kid, I understand that you're going through tough times, but this hospital has very clear rules that exist for good, legal, and administrative reasons. What I can suggest is that you look for a public shelter for abandoned minors, where you'll receive proper care and can get medical attention through the appropriate channels. Now I need to ask you to leave quietly, because you're disturbing other patients who also need care. Tommy picked Emma back up in his arms, feeling that she was even colder and more motionless than before, and began to slowly walk toward the hospital exit, closely escorted by the security guard who wanted to make sure they really left the building. Every step toward the automatic doors felt like a step toward Emma's death, and Tommy felt as if he were carrying not only his sister, but also the crushing weight of a system that had completely failed two children who most needed help. The bright lights and welcoming warmth of the hospital were left behind, replaced once again by the cutting cold and the threatening darkness of the Chicago night. When the automatic doors closed behind them with a final, definitive noise, Tommy felt as if the last door of hope had also shut forever. How can a place that's supposed to save lives refuse to help a child who is dying? How can there be rules more important than the life of my innocent little sister? In the hospital's icy parking lot, under the yellow light of the lampposts that created circles of clarity in the snow that kept falling, Tommy stopped abruptly when he realized something terrible and desperate. Emma was no longer breathing. He desperately pressed his ear against her small chest, but couldn't hear or feel any sign of breathing or a heartbeat. His eyes widened in absolute panic and pure terror, and he began to gently shake Emma, then more forcefully, trying to make her respond in any possible way. The cold of the parking lot seemed even more intense now, as if death itself were approaching to claim his little sister right in front of the hospital that had refused to save her. Emma, my dear little sister, breathe for your brother. Don't leave me alone now, not after everything we've been through together. Please God, if you really exist, don't let my little sister die here in this cold parking lot like an abandoned animal. After discovering that Emma had stopped breathing in the icy hospital parking lot, Tommy went into total panic and began running like crazy through the streets of Chicago, carrying the apparently lifeless body of his little sister in his trembling arms. He no longer knew where to go or what to do, but some desperate instinct made him run toward the city center, where the lights were brighter and there was more movement of people even at that late hour of the night. His tears froze on his face as he ran, creating small ice crystals that reflected the streetlights, and with each step he could feel Emma becoming stiffer and colder in his small, tired arms. The cutting wind of the winter night whipped his thin face, but he barely felt the physical cold, as the emotional pain of losing his only family was far more intense than any bodily discomfort he could experience. After running through streets he knew by heart, Tommy found himself near the United Center, where a crowd of elegantly dressed people was leaving some kind of sophisticated charity event. Please, God, if there's still hope for my little sister, send me an angel now. I can't let her die like this. I can't break the sacred promise I made to our mom. The United Center was lit up like a golden palace in the darkness of the cold night, its bright lights magnificently reflecting off the snow that continued to fall in large, heavy flakes, creating an almost magical scene that brutally contrasted with the absolute despair Tommy felt in his broken heart. Dozens of luxurious cars of expensive brands were parked neatly in the VIP parking area, with uniformed, well-dressed drivers patiently waiting next to the vehicles, while richly dressed people in fur coats and sparkling jewelry walked elegantly toward their cars, chatting animatedly about the charity event that had just ended successfully. Tommy ran desperately toward this crowd of seemingly important and influential people, thinking that perhaps someone with so much money, power, and social connections might have the ability to help him in a way that ordinary street people couldn't or wouldn't. He screamed desperately as he approached the elegant crowd, holding cold Emma against his thin chest and trying to catch the attention of anyone willing to hear his urgent plea for immediate medical help. The well-dressed people looked at him with an evident mixture of surprise, discomfort, and even repulsion, clearly shocked and disturbed by the sudden appearance of a dirty, ragged, and desperate child carrying another apparently unconscious or dead child. "Someone help me, please. My little sister isn't breathing and needs a doctor urgently. You are important and powerful people. You must know a doctor who can save her from death." It was in this moment of total desperation and absolute panic that Tommy saw an unmistakable and familiar figure walking proudly toward a luxurious, shiny black car, carefully surrounded by two large and intimidating men in dark suits who were clearly professional, well-trained bodyguards. Even at 62 years old with graying hair, the imposing athletic posture, characteristic height, and majestic bearing of Michael Jordan were absolutely unmistakable to anyone who had grown up in Chicago. And Tommy recognized him immediately from the countless giant posters, colorful billboards, and television commercials spread all over the city, where Jordan was still treated as a living legend, a local hero, and a symbol of hope for poor kids like him. Tommy's small heart raced violently with an explosive mix of desperate hope, deep admiration, and instant recognition, for he knew he was seeing before his eyes someone who not only had all the power, influence, and financial resources necessary to help him, but who also shared his humble and suffering origins in Chicago's South Side. Jordan wore an elegant, expensive black tuxedo that shone under the parking lot lights and looked visibly tired after the charity event that had lasted several hours. But there was something in his facial expression and eyes that suggested he still maintained a deep emotional connection with his poor and difficult roots, even after decades of worldwide fame, incalculable fortune, and extraordinary success. Tommy took a deep breath, gathered all the courage he still had in his small, fragile body, and shouted with all the strength that still existed in his weak and tired lungs. "Mr. Michael Jordan, please, can you help me? I know who you are, and I know you understand what it's like to grow up poor and abandoned in Chicago." Michael Jordan abruptly stopped in his tracks when he heard his full name shouted by a desperate, emotionally charged child's voice, and he slowly turned to see where that urgent and heartbreaking plea was coming from, cutting through the elegant and sophisticated post-event chatter like a sharp knife slicing delicate silk. His experienced, observant eyes immediately fixed on Tommy, who was running toward him, carrying Emma in his arms, as if she were made of the most fragile and precious crystal in the world. And for a long, tense moment, Jordan stood completely still and silent, as if mentally processing and trying to understand the surreal and dramatic scene unfolding before him like a slow-motion film. Jordan's two professional bodyguards, large and muscular men with years of experience protecting celebrities and important personalities, immediately positioned themselves strategically between him and Tommy, automatically following the strict and well-established security protocol to protect a figure of such magnitude and importance from any unauthorized, unplanned, or potentially dangerous approach. But Jordan raised his right hand in a subtle but firm gesture that made the bodyguards hesitate and reconsider their actions. For there was something in the touching scene that stirred deep and painful memories in Jordan. Vivid recollections of his own extremely difficult childhood in the South Side, when he and his siblings often relied entirely on the kindness, generosity, and compassion of strangers to survive the harshest, coldest, and most desperate periods of their lives. That desperate kid reminds me exactly of myself when I was his age, and desperately needed someone powerful to believe in me. There's something in his terrible situation that's deeply moving my heart in a way I didn't expect to feel. Jordan's bodyguards, two large, intimidating, and highly trained men in impeccable black suits with small earpieces connected to sophisticated communication systems, immediately moved with military precision to intercept Tommy before he could get too close to their protected client, rigorously following the extensive and detailed security protocols carefully established to keep Jordan safe and protected at all his public appearances, social events, and professional engagements. The nearest bodyguard, a bald and muscular man with a visible scar on his chin that suggested experience in dangerous situations, extended his strong arm in a clear physical barrier and spoke with a firm, authoritative, and professional voice, trying to get Tommy to stop his desperate approach without having to use actual physical force against a small child clearly in a state of total panic. Tommy, however, was so completely desperate and determined that he totally ignored the intimidating physical presence of the bodyguards and continued running toward Jordan with a fierce determination that surprised everyone present. Loudly shouting about Emma's critical condition and begging for help with a raw, emotional intensity that made several other elegant people stop their sophisticated conversations to watch with curiosity and concern the dramatic scene unfolding before their eyes like an improvised theatrical spectacle. Jordan carefully observed Tommy's fierce and desperate determination and recognized in it exactly the same kind of inner fire, burning passion, and absolute refusal to give up that had propelled him through all the seemingly impossible obstacles of his own extraordinary life. From the makeshift, poorly maintained basketball courts of the South Side to the most important, prestigious, and televised stages of world sports. Sir, please step back immediately and maintain a safe distance from Mr. Jordan for personal security reasons. This is a mandatory standard protocol, and we need you to cooperate completely and immediately with us. Tommy completely ignored the firm and authoritative warning from the security guard and kept running with all his strength, his small, thin, and tired legs moving as fast as they could while holding Emma with extreme care not to hurt her even more, if that was even physically possible considering her apparently critical condition. When he finally got close enough for Jordan to clearly see him under the bright parking lot lights and closely observe his facial expression, Tommy stopped abruptly and looked directly into the experienced and famous eyes of Michael Jordan, completely ignoring the intimidating security guards who positioned themselves threateningly around him like human towers. His words came out in a desperate and emotional scream that cut through all social barriers, security protocols, and class differences like a sharp sword, filled with pure sincerity, genuine urgency, and absolute despair that instantly reminded Jordan of the hardest, loneliest, and most desperate moments of his own poor and troubled childhood. The snow kept falling heavily around all of them, creating an almost cinematic and surreal atmosphere for this completely improbable encounter between a world sports legend and two abandoned and desperate children who represented exactly the kind of situation Jordan thought he had left behind after decades of success. Sir, my little sister isn't breathing. I know you grew up poor in the South Side like me, and I know you understand exactly what it's like to have absolutely no one to help when you need it more than anything. My little sister Emma is literally dying, and the hospital coldly refused to treat her because we are street kids without documents. You're the only person in all of Chicago who has the real power to save her. I beg you desperately for your human compassion. Michael Jordan felt a powerful and overwhelming wave of conflicting and contradictory emotions rush through his entire body when he heard Tommy's heartbreaking words and saw with his own eyes the obviously critical and alarming state of Emma in the small, trembling arms of the desperate boy. On one hand, his natural instincts of self-preservation, personal care, and the strict security protocols that completely governed his public life and social appearances clearly instructed him to keep a safe distance from potentially complicated, controversial, or legally problematic situations like the one unfolding before him. But on the other hand, his deep moral conscience, his fundamental human values, and his vivid and painful memories of an extremely poor childhood in the South Side screamed loudly and clearly that he should do something concrete and immediate to help these two children clearly in real danger of death. Jordan could easily see that Emma was in a critical and potentially fatal state. Her small and delicate skin had taken on a frightening and unnatural bluish coloration, indicating severe lack of oxygen, and she was completely motionless and silent, with no visible sign of life, breathing, or movement that could indicate there was still hope of saving her. Tommy's thin face was clearly marked by frozen tears, pure despair, and a fierce determination that Jordan perfectly remembered having seen in the mirror during the hardest and most desperate moments of his own childhood, when he and his family struggled daily to survive extreme poverty, the violence of Chicago's dangerous streets, and the total lack of opportunities that characterized life in the ghetto. This brave kid is going through the same kind of absolute despair that I went through when I was a child with nowhere to run or anyone to turn to. How can I consciously turn my back on two children who are going through exactly the same hell I went through. Jordan's experienced security guards were clearly uncomfortable and concerned with the situation that was developing, as their professional instructions were clear and unequivocal about keeping Jordan completely away from any situation that could potentially compromise his personal safety, his carefully crafted public image, or his professional reputation that had been built over decades of hard work. But they could also clearly see that their boss and protected person was being deeply and visibly affected by the touching and dramatic scene unfolding before all of them like a real-life drama. The head security guard, an experienced veteran with over 20 years of solid experience protecting important celebrities, influential politicians, and high-profile public figures, carefully and discreetly approached Jordan and whispered softly in his ear, trying diplomatically to remind him of the significant potential risks and possible consequences of becoming deeply involved in such a complicated, emotionally charged, and potentially controversial situation as the one happening now. He carefully mentioned the real possibility of elaborate traps, sophisticated scams, or even situations that could be easily misinterpreted by sensationalist media if later discovered by opportunistic reporters or photographers. But Jordan seemed to be in a completely different world, totally absorbed and emotionally involved by the heartbreaking sight of Tommy holding Emma, and by the flood of painful memories of his own desperate struggle to escape poverty. Mr. Jordan, we need to very carefully consider the significant security and image risks of this complicated situation. Perhaps it's best that we head straight to the car and let the appropriate authorities handle this properly. Jordan looked deeply and intensely into Tommy's bright, desperate eyes and saw reflected in them all the indescribable pain, absolute despair, fierce determination, and unconditional fraternal love that he himself had felt as a child and still kept somewhere deep in his heart. At that crucial and decisive moment, he made a courageous decision that would not only dramatically change the lives of the two children, but also fundamentally change his own perspective on what really mattered in life and what his true responsibility was to his community of origin. He gently but firmly pushed aside the worried security guards with a decisive hand gesture and took a determined step toward Tommy, completely ignoring all established security protocols, all potential consequences of his spontaneous act of human compassion, and all the voices of caution whispering in his mind about the risks of getting involved. When Jordan carefully bent down to examine Emma more closely with his own eyes and personally assess the severity of the situation, he could immediately see that it was infinitely more serious and urgent than any imaginable public relations, personal security, or professional image problem that could arise from his direct and personal involvement. Emma was completely cyanotic. Her delicate skin had taken on a terrifying bluish-gray coloration that clearly indicated severe and prolonged lack of oxygen. And when Jordan delicately and carefully placed his experienced fingers on her small, fragile neck to check for any detectable pulse, his famous face visibly paled with what he discovered, or, more precisely, with what he couldn't find. My God, this precious child has no detectable pulse and isn't breathing at all. Tommy, my brave boy, how long exactly has she been in this critical state? We need to act immediately and with utmost urgency before it's too late to save her from death. Jordan looked deeply and intensely into Tommy's bright, desperate eyes and saw reflected in them all the indescribable pain, absolute despair, fierce determination, and unconditional fraternal love that he himself had felt as a child and still kept somewhere deep in his heart. At that crucial and decisive moment, he made a courageous decision that would not only dramatically change the lives of the two children, but also fundamentally change his own perspective on what really mattered in life and what his true responsibility was to his community of origin. He gently but firmly pushed aside the worried security guards with a decisive hand gesture and took a determined step toward Tommy, completely ignoring all established security protocols, all potential consequences of his spontaneous act of human compassion, and all the voices of caution whispering in his mind about the risks of getting involved. When Jordan carefully bent down to examine Emma more closely with his own eyes and personally assess the severity of the situation, he could immediately see that it was infinitely more serious and urgent than any imaginable public relations, personal security, or professional image problem that could arise from his direct and personal involvement. Emma was completely cyanotic. Her delicate skin had taken on a terrifying bluish-gray coloration that clearly indicated severe and prolonged lack of oxygen. And when Jordan delicately and carefully placed his experienced fingers on her small, fragile neck to check for any detectable pulse, his famous face visibly paled with what he discovered, or more precisely, with what he couldn't find. My God, this precious child has no detectable pulse and isn't breathing at all. Tommy, my brave boy, how long exactly has she been in this critical state? We need to act immediately and with utmost urgency before it's too late to save her from death. The moment Michael Jordan confirmed that Emma had no pulse and wasn't breathing, he immediately took his cell phone out of the inner pocket of his tuxedo and began making urgent calls, using all his influence and connections to mobilize Chicago's best medical team within minutes. His voice was firm and authoritative when he spoke to the director of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, one of the city's most prestigious private hospitals, demanding that a private ambulance equipped with the best emergency equipment be sent immediately to the United Center. Jordan held Emma in his arms while talking on the phone, feeling the frightening weight of a life hanging by a thread, and Tommy remained by his side, trembling not only from the cold, but from absolute panic at seeing his little sister in such a critical state. The cold Chicago wind blew around them, but Jordan was completely focused on saving the child's life, totally ignoring the cold, the snow, and the curious looks of the people who still remained in the United Center parking lot. Dr. Harrison, this is Michael Jordan, and I need you to send your best ambulance with a full resuscitation team to the United Center right now. We have a 4-year-old child in cardiopulmonary arrest, and every second counts to save her life. The private ambulance arrived in less than 10 minutes, with sirens blaring and red and blue lights cutting through the night's darkness like beams of desperate hope. 2 highly trained paramedics jumped out of the vehicle carrying sophisticated medical equipment, including a portable defibrillator, oxygen cylinders, and a special stretcher for children. Tommy watched in shock as the professionals immediately took control of the situation, placing Emma on the stretcher and starting cardiopulmonary resuscitation procedures with precise and coordinated movements that demonstrated years of experience in life or death situations. Jordan kept his protective hand on Tommy's shoulder, offering the only comfort he could while the paramedics worked feverishly to try to bring Emma back to life. The electronic equipment emitted sharp sounds and constant beeps, indicating the critical gravity of the situation, while one of the paramedics prepared an adrenaline injection directly into Emma's tiny heart. Tommy, my brave boy, these are the best doctors in all of Chicago, and they're going to do everything humanly possible to save your little sister. You've been incredibly brave tonight, and Emma is going to fight to come back to you. During the frantic trip to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, with the ambulance cutting through the early morning traffic at maximum speed, Jordan sat next to Tommy on the narrow bench while the paramedics continued the resuscitation procedures on Emma with desperate intensity. The interior of the ambulance was filled with sophisticated medical equipment, flashing lights, and the constant sound of monitors showing Emma's critical vital signs, creating an atmosphere of extreme tension that made every second feel like an eternity. Jordan looked at Tommy, who was clearly in a state of shock and trauma, and decided to try to distract him from the terrible situation by telling him about his own difficult childhood in Chicago's South Side, hoping to create an emotional connection that could offer some comfort to the desperate boy. His words were carefully chosen to be comforting but honest, trying to make Tommy understand that he was not alone in his struggle against poverty and abandonment. Tommy, when I was exactly your age, I also went through terrible moments that made me think there was no hope in the world. My father died when I was very young, and my mother, Dolores, had to work 3 different jobs to try to keep us alive and fed in the South Side. Jordan continued his personal story while the paramedics worked intensely on Emma, using a manual respirator to force air into her small lungs and performing rhythmic chest compressions on her tiny chest. Tommy listened to every word with desperate attention, clinging to Jordan's voice like an anchor of hope amid the medical chaos happening around him. Jordan spoke about the nights when he and his siblings went to bed hungry because there wasn't enough food, about how his mother Dolores cried silently thinking the children weren't watching, and about how he learned very early that the only way to escape poverty was through absolute determination and refusal to give up on dreams, even when everything seemed impossible. Tears ran down Tommy's face as he listened to the story, recognizing his own pain reflected in Jordan's words. And for the first time since his mother's death, he felt understood by someone who truly knew what it meant to be abandoned by the world. My mother always told me that God never gives us burdens bigger than we can carry, Tommy. She used to say that children like us, who grow up facing hardships, develop an inner strength that others can never understand. When they arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, a full team of doctors and nurses specialized in pediatric emergency was already waiting at the entrance, alerted in advance by Jordan's call and prepared to receive Emma in critical condition. The private hospital was a completely different world from the public ER where Tommy had been rejected hours earlier. Here, no one asked about documents, health insurance, or adult guardians, as Michael Jordan's influence and word were enough to guarantee the best medical treatment available in the city. Emma was immediately taken to an emergency operating room equipped with the most advanced equipment of modern medicine, while Tommy and Jordan were directed to a private and comfortable waiting room where they could await news without being disturbed. Jordan stayed by Tommy's side throughout the anguishing wait, offering words of encouragement and sharing more stories from his childhood to keep the boy's mind occupied and away from the terrifying thoughts about what might be happening with Emma in the operating room. Tommy, I want you to know that no matter what happens tonight, you'll never be alone in this world again. You've shown a courage and fraternal love that reminded me of everything good in humanity. After about 3 hours of emergency surgery that seemed to last an entire eternity, Dr. Stevens, a renowned pediatric surgeon with over 20 years of experience in critical cases, emerged from the operating room still wearing his green surgical uniform and removing bloodied gloves. His face showed signs of extreme fatigue, but there was a gleam of relief in his eyes that made Tommy's heart leap with hope even before he uttered a single word. Jordan immediately got up from the comfortable armchair where he had spent the last hours consoling Tommy, and the two approached the doctor with maximum expectation and anxiety, prepared to hear the verdict that would determine whether Emma had survived the most terrible night of their young lives. Dr. Stevens took a deep breath before speaking, clearly aware that his next words would completely change the fate of two children who had faced more adversity in their short lives than many adults face in entire decades. Gentlemen, I have good news for you, but I also need to be completely honest about the seriousness of what happened tonight. Emma was literally saved by seconds. If you had taken 2 more minutes to get here, she would have suffered irreversible brain damage or definitive death. During the 3 days Emma remained hospitalized for observation and complete recovery, Jordan spent most of the time visiting the children and having long conversations with Tommy about his future plans, his dreams, and his natural abilities. It was during these intimate conversations that Jordan discovered Tommy had an impressive natural talent for basketball, demonstrated when he improvised a basket using a trash can and a crumpled paper ball he found in the hospital room. The boy had learned the fundamentals of the game by watching old Jordan games on a TV in an electronics store, and his natural technique, exceptional coordination, and competitive instinct reminded Jordan of himself as a child dreaming of escaping the streets through sports. More importantly, Jordan was deeply impressed by the absolute loyalty and unconditional love that Tommy showed for Emma, refusing to leave her bedside even for a few minutes, and insisting on sleeping on the hospital room floor to be close to her during her recovery. Tommy, in all my years playing professional basketball, I've never seen someone your age demonstrate such dedication and love for another person. You've taught me more about courage and loyalty in 3 days than I've learned in decades of competition. The natural talent you have for basketball is impressive, but your character and your capacity to love are even more extraordinary. On the 3rd day of Emma's hospitalization, when she was finally strong enough to sit up in bed and smile again, Jordan made a decision that would change not only the lives of the 2 children, but also his own perspective on social responsibility and the true meaning of success. He had spent the last 72 hours deeply reflecting on the chance encounter that had saved Emma's life, and began to realize that fate had placed these children in his path for a greater reason than he had initially imagined. Jordan knew that his fame, fortune, and influence gave him a unique opportunity to make a difference in the lives of abandoned children. And the courage demonstrated by Tommy had awakened in him a passion for social justice that had remained dormant for years of exclusive focus on his career and personal business. However, when Jordan began to investigate more deeply the situation of street children in Chicago, he made a shocking discovery that left him simultaneously horrified and determined to act on a much larger scale than he had initially imagined. Tommy, I've made a decision that will change both of your lives forever. But during my research, I discovered something that left me absolutely shocked. There are literally dozens of other children on the streets of Chicago going through the same terrible situation you went through, and many of them won't be lucky enough to find someone to help them. Jordan revealed to Tommy that he had discovered through social assistance organizations and police reports that there were at least 43 children under the age of 12 living on the streets of Chicago during that harsh winter. Many of them orphaned or abandoned by families who could no longer support them during the economic crisis that plagued the city. Some of these children were in even worse conditions than Tommy and Emma had been, living in abandoned buildings without heating, surviving on leftover food found in the trash, and facing daily dangers that included violence, exploitation, and diseases that could easily be fatal without proper medical treatment. The discovery had impacted Jordan so deeply that he could no longer sleep properly, as his mind was constantly preoccupied with all those children who were facing the same despair that Tommy had felt the night he almost lost Emma. Jordan realized that saving just 2 children, while significant, would be only a drop in the ocean of suffering that existed right under his nose in his own hometown. And this realization forced him to confront profound questions about moral responsibility and the true purpose of his wealth and influence. Tommy, my brave boy, I can't simply save you two and ignore all the other children who are going through the same hell you went through. That wouldn't be fair to you or to them, and it wouldn't be worthy of the man my mother Dolores taught me to be. The next morning, when Emma was fully recovered and the doctors had given her final discharge with post-hospital care instructions, Michael Jordan arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, personally driving his luxury car, a decision that even surprised his most experienced security guards. Throughout the previous night, Jordan had stayed awake in his mansion in Highland Park, restlessly pacing the silent hallways and looking out the window at the distant lights of Chicago, unable to get out of his mind the terrible images of the 43 children who were facing the same hell that Tommy and Emma had lived through. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw imaginary faces of hungry, scared, and abandoned children, sleeping in rusty cars, collapsed buildings, and icy alleys with no one to protect them or care for them when they got sick. The discovery about the extent of the problem had completely transformed his perspective on social responsibility, and he knew that he could no longer live in peace with himself, knowing that he had the necessary resources to make a difference, but chose to ignore the suffering happening right under his nose. When he entered the hospital room and saw Tommy carefully helping Emma get dressed with new clothes that Jordan had bought during the night, he felt a wave of emotion take over his chest. Tommy, Emma, are you ready to see your new temporary home? I have some very important things to discuss with both of you, and I think you're going to like what I've planned for your future. The 40-minute journey to Highland Park was a completely new experience for Tommy and Emma, who had never left Chicago's South Side and certainly had never been inside such a luxurious and comfortable car like Jordan's. Emma, still a little weak but visibly excited, pressed her little face against the car window to observe the huge houses, well-kept gardens, and clean streets that sharply contrasted with the decaying urban environment where they had grown up. Tommy remained more reserved and observant, his intelligent eyes absorbing every detail of the new reality presented to him, but also demonstrating a natural caution of someone who had learned far too early that life can change drastically from one moment to the next. Jordan watched the children's reactions through the rearview mirror, vividly remembering his own first time visiting wealthy neighborhoods as a child, when his mother Dolores would take him to work as a housekeeper in the homes of affluent families, and how those experiences had planted in his young mind the seed of ambition to one day have a better life. During the trip, he began to share with the children his preliminary plans for something much bigger than simply helping them individually, something that could impact hundreds of other children in similar situations. Kids, during the night, I had a revelation that completely changed my view about what really matters in life. You two showed me that there's a much bigger problem in our city, and I believe God placed you in my path to show me what my true purpose is. When they arrived at Jordan's imposing mansion in Highland Park, a spectacular property with extensive gardens, a three-story main house, and several auxiliary buildings, Tommy and Emma were completely speechless at the grandeur of the place that looked like it had come straight out of a Hollywood movie. Jordan led them through the electronic gates and the main entrance, observing the expressions of admiration and disbelief on the faces of the children who had never imagined that places like that really existed in the real world. The house was decorated with trophies, medals, and photographs from Jordan's entire legendary career. But what most impressed Tommy were the numerous photos of Jordan as a child, especially those where he appeared playing basketball on improvised courts in the South Side. Images that clearly showed that even a world legend had started in exactly the same humble place where Tommy and Emma had grown up. Jordan took them to a comfortable living room with lit fireplaces and luxurious furniture, where he prepared hot chocolate for Emma and coffee for Tommy, treating them with the same consideration and respect he would offer any important guest in his home. During this first intimate conversation in his residence, Jordan revealed more specific details about his ambitious plan to create an institute dedicated exclusively to homeless children, explaining how his personal experiences in the encounter with them had crystallized a vision he had subconsciously carried for years. Tommy, Emma, I want you to know that this house is now your home for as long as you need it, but more importantly, I want you to be part of something revolutionary that's going to change the lives of hundreds of children. You inspired me to create the Jordan Second Chance Institute, a place where children like you will not only have shelter and food, but education, professional training, and the opportunity to discover their unique talents. Jordan continued to explain in detail his vision for the institute, describing how it would be built in Chicago's South Side itself, at the heart of the community where he had grown up and where the need was most urgent and evident. He spoke about warm and comfortable dormitories, an industrial kitchen that would serve nutritious meals 3 times a day, classrooms equipped with modern technology, professional training workshops for teenagers, a full library, an infirmary with full-time doctors and nurses, and several basketball courts where children could develop sports skills that could potentially lead to college scholarships. Tommy listened to every word with growing admiration and amazement, realizing that Jordan wasn't just talking about temporary charity, but about a systematic and permanent transformation of the opportunities available to abandoned children like them. Emma, still recovering but clearly enchanted by the safe and welcoming environment, fell asleep on the soft couch while the two talked, and Jordan carefully covered her with a cashmere blanket, demonstrating the same tenderness that a devoted father would offer to his own daughter. The conversation extended for several hours, during which Jordan discovered even more details about Tommy's exceptional intelligence, his natural leadership ability, and his unwavering determination to protect and care for Emma, regardless of the circumstances. Tommy, I want you to be more than just a beneficiary of this institute. I want you to be my youngest partner, someone who helps me understand the real needs of street children because you live that reality. Your experience and your wisdom are just as valuable as all my financial resources. In the late afternoon, Jordan revealed to Tommy that he had organized a special dinner to introduce them to a very special family who had expressed genuine interest in meeting them after Jordan discreetly shared their story with a few close and trusted friends. The Williams family, composed of Robert and Sarah Williams, were a prosperous, middle-aged couple who had tried to have children for many years without success, and who had long considered adoption as a way to complete their family and offer unconditional love to children in need of a permanent home. Robert Williams was a successful engineer who had developed a thriving technology company, while Sarah was a former elementary school teacher who had left her career to dedicate herself to volunteer work with organizations assisting underprivileged children. Jordan had known the couple for several years through charity events and knew that they not only had the financial resources necessary to provide an excellent education and future for Tommy and Emma, but more importantly, they had generous hearts and the emotional capacity to offer the genuine and unconditional love that the two children desperately needed and deserved. When Jordan explained the situation to Tommy, he could immediately see the mixture of hope and terror in the boy's eyes, who had learned through painful experiences to be cautious with any promise of stability or lasting happiness. Tommy, I know you're afraid to trust adults after everything you've been through, but the Williams are special people who will love you and Emma unconditionally. They're not strangers trying to impress anyone. They are a genuine family looking for children to love, and you are children looking for parents to trust. Despite the positive atmosphere and the obvious connections that were forming during dinner, Tommy still showed visible emotional resistance to the idea of accepting a new family. His psychological defense mechanisms working to protect him from the possibility of another devastating loss if things didn't work out as promised. Jordan carefully observed Tommy's facial expressions and recognized the signs of internal conflict that he himself had experienced as a child, when important opportunities arose but were accompanied by the fear of disappointment or future abandonment. During a pause in the conversation, when Sarah took Emma to see some children's books in Jordan's library, and Robert went to the bathroom, Jordan took the opportunity to have a frank and direct conversation with Tommy about his fears and hesitations, using basketball analogies that he knew the boy would understand and appreciate. He spoke about how great basketball players need to be willing to receive passes from teammates, even when they're not absolutely sure the pass will be perfect, because refusing good opportunities out of fear of failure guarantees never achieving success. Jordan explained that life often offers passes in the form of good people who want to help, and that part of the wisdom of living is learning to distinguish between genuine opportunities and false promises, and then having enough courage to accept the real opportunities when they appear. Tommy, my brave young friend, I completely understand your fear because I went through the same hesitation when I was a child, and important people appeared offering help. But here's something I learned during my career. Great players always accept good plays when they appear, even when they don't have absolute certainty of the outcome, because they know that refusing excellent opportunities out of fear is the only guaranteed way never to win. The basketball analogy resonated deeply with Tommy, who had watched Jordan play in old videos and intuitively understood the wisdom behind the metaphor about accepting passes from reliable teammates. Over the next 20 minutes, Jordan continued talking with Tommy about trust, family, and the difference between healthy prudence and paralyzing fear, helping the boy process his conflicting emotions and make an informed decision about his and Emma's future. Tommy spoke openly about his fears that something terrible could happen again, about how he had promised his mother that he would always take care of Emma, and about his concern that accepting a new family could somehow represent a betrayal of his biological mother's memory. Jordan patiently listened to each concern and responded with the wisdom of someone who had faced difficult decisions and similar emotional dilemmas during his own journey from poverty to success, assuring Tommy that accepting love and care from the Williams would in no way diminish the love he felt for his mother, but in fact would honor her memory by allowing him and Emma to have the happy and prosperous life she had always wanted for them. When Sarah and Emma returned from the library, followed by Robert, Tommy made a courageous decision that would change the course of their lives forever, looking directly into the kind eyes of the Williams and uttering the words that sealed their family destiny. Mr. Robert, Mrs. Sarah, I accept being adopted by you, and I accept that Emma be adopted too, because Mr. Jordan taught me that great players accept good plays when they appear. I promise I'll be the best son you can imagine, and I'll take care of Emma forever. The moment Tommy uttered those words was electrifying and emotionally charged, with tears of joy streaming down the faces of all the adults present as Emma ran to hug both Tommy and her new adoptive parents with the innocent spontaneity of a child who instinctively recognizes genuine love when she finds it. Sarah and Robert Williams were visibly moved and grateful, expressing their determination to provide Tommy and Emma not only with material and educational stability, but also with the unconditional love, emotional support, and sense of family belonging that every child deserves during their formative years. Jordan watched the scene with a profound sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, knowing that he had played a crucial role in bringing together a family that would be mutually beneficial and loving, but also knowing that this was only the first step of a much larger plan that was forming in his visionary mind. After the initial emotions subsided and everyone calmed down, Jordan asked for the group's attention and revealed that he had a special surprise planned for the official adoption day, something that would not only celebrate the new Williams-Tommy-Emma family, but also mark the official launch of his Institute for Street Children and represent the beginning of a systematic transformation of how Chicago cared for its most vulnerable children. His eyes shone with excitement and determination as he began to describe the magnitude of the event he was planning, an event that would place Tommy and Emma at the center of a ceremony that would change not only their lives, but potentially the lives of hundreds of other children in similar situations. Family Williams, my dear Tommy and Emma, I have a special surprise planned for the day of your official adoption, something that will transform this personal moment into a historic milestone for our city. On the same day that you officially become a family, we will be inaugurating the Jordan Second Chance Institute, and Tommy will be my official young ambassador, helping to cut the inaugural ribbon alongside Emma. 3 weeks after Tommy's decision to accept the adoption, the morning of the most important day of their young lives dawned clear and sunny, with a bright blue sky that magnificently contrasted with the white snow still covering the streets of Chicago, creating a perfect setting for the monumental celebrations that were about to happen. At the Cook County Family Court, an elegant and imposing courtroom with dark wood paneling and large windows that generously allowed natural light in, Tommy and Emma sat nervously but hopefully beside Robert and Sarah Williams, all dressed in their best clothes for the official adoption ceremony that would finally make them a legal and permanent family. Tommy wore a new navy blue suit that Sarah had carefully chosen for him, and Emma looked beautiful in a pink dress with shiny white shoes, both appearing completely transformed from the dirty and desperate children who had been found on the icy streets just a few weeks earlier. Michael Jordan was present as a special witness and guest of honor, wearing an elegant gray suit and proudly watching the children who had changed his perspective on social responsibility and the true meaning of success in life. When the judge called the case Williams versus State of Illinois for the adoption of minors, Tommy felt his heart race with a mixture of emotion, gratitude, and a renewed determination to live up to the extraordinary second chance he was receiving. Today is not just the day Emma and I gain a new family. It's the day we prove that kids like us can overcome any obstacle when someone believes in our potential. Mom, wherever you are, I hope you're proud of the choices we've made. The adoption ceremony was conducted by Judge Patricia Henderson, a compassionate and experienced 60-year-old woman who had presided over thousands of adoptions during her distinguished career, but who had rarely witnessed a case with so many positive emotions and genuine hope as the one happening before her on that special morning. She carefully read all the necessary legal documents, explained the rights and responsibilities of everyone involved, and asked the formal questions required by law to ensure that both the children and the adoptive parents were making this decision completely voluntarily and well-informed. Tommy answered each question with an impressive clarity and maturity for his age, demonstrating that he fully understood the magnitude of the decision he was making and that he was genuinely excited about the prospect of becoming part of the Williams family for the rest of his life. Emma, although still too young to fully understand the legal aspects of the procedure, radiated happiness and confidence as she held Sarah's hand, clearly feeling safe and loved in a way she hadn't experienced since before the death of her biological mother. When the judge finally struck the gavel and officially proclaimed that Tommy and Emma Williams were now the legal children of Robert and Sarah Williams, the room erupted in emotional applause, tears of joy, and warm hugs that symbolized the birth of a new family and the beginning of a bright and promising future. Congratulations to the new Williams family. It is an honor and a privilege to preside over an adoption where I can feel so much genuine love and mutual dedication among all involved. Tommy and Emma, you have wonderful parents who will love you unconditionally, and Robert and Sarah, you have gained two extraordinary children who will bring infinite joy to your lives. Immediately after the conclusion of the legal ceremony, while everyone was still emotional and celebrating in the elegant hallways of the courthouse, Michael Jordan called for everyone's attention and finally revealed the special surprise he had promised, an announcement that would transform that personal day into a historic milestone for the entire city of Chicago. With his eyes shining with excitement and determination, Jordan explained that he had spent the past 3 weeks working around the clock with architects, builders, educators, and social workers to transform an old abandoned industrial complex in the South Side into something revolutionary and transformative. He had invested $10 million of his own personal fortune to create the Jordan Second Chance Institute, a complete and modern facility that would not only offer temporary shelter for homeless children, but also quality education, professional training, medical care, sports programs, and most importantly, a loving and structured environment where every child could discover and develop their unique and extraordinary talents. The Williams family was thrilled and impressed by the magnitude of Jordan's vision, and Tommy felt a wave of pride and responsibility upon realizing that he would be the Institute's first official young ambassador, representing all the children who would benefit from the program and serving as living proof that incredible transformations are possible when someone offers a genuine second chance. Family Williams, my dear Tommy and Emma, today is not just the day you officially became a family, it's also the day we officially launched the Jordan Second Chance Institute. Tommy, you will be my first young ambassador, and today you'll help cut the inaugural ribbon and kick off a revolution in how our city cares for its most vulnerable children. The convoy of cars that headed from the courthouse to Chicago's South Side was impressive and exciting, led by Jordan's car and followed by the Williams with Tommy and Emma, as well as several other vehicles carrying journalists, photographers, city officials, and social activists whom Jordan had invited to witness and document the historic launch of the Institute. During the 45-minute journey through the city, Tommy looked out the window at the familiar streets of his childhood, but now saw everything with completely different eyes, no longer as a desperate boy struggling to survive, but as a young ambassador with an important mission to inspire other children to believe that extraordinary changes are possible, even in the most difficult circumstances. Emma was excited by all the attention and celebration, not fully understanding the historical magnitude of what was happening, but clearly feeling that she was part of something special and important that made her feel valued and loved. Sarah and Robert Williams spoke emotionally about how their lives had completely changed in just a few weeks, going from a childless couple to a family of 4 involved in a transformative social project that would impact hundreds of other families. When they finally arrived at the address in the South Side where the Institute had been built, everyone was impressed by the complete transformation that had been carried out in the old industrial complex, now converted into a modern and welcoming campus with landscaped gardens, colorful playgrounds, and a renovated facade that radiated hope and infinite possibilities. Tommy, can you believe that just a month ago you were desperately running through these same streets looking for help for Emma? Now you're coming back as a leader and inspiration for hundreds of other children going through the same situation you and Emma faced. When the cars arrived at the Jordan Second Chance Institute, a crowd of over 500 people was already gathered in the parking lot and surrounding gardens, including Southside families, children of various ages, social workers, local politicians, journalists from multiple media outlets, and dozens of former basketball players who had come to pay tribute to Jordan and support his extraordinary humanitarian initiative. The Institute itself was an impressive vision of modern and functional architecture, with a 3-story main building housing dormitories, classrooms, and administrative areas, a separate building with an industrial kitchen and community dining hall, a fully equipped medical clinic, professional training workshops for teenagers, a modern library with computers and internet, and what stood out the most, 3 covered and illuminated basketball courts where children could practice sports regardless of the weather conditions. Tommy was moved to see so many people gathered to celebrate not only his new family, but also the creation of a place that would offer hope and opportunities to children who were going through exactly the same hardships that he and Emma had faced. Jordan, surrounded by cameras and microphones, took the opportunity to give an impromptu speech about social responsibility, second chances, and the transformative power of unconditional love. But what touched everyone's heart the most was when he called Tommy to stand by his side during the informal press conference. This institute is not just about offering shelter and food to children in need. It's about recognizing that every child abandoned on the streets has unlimited potential waiting to be discovered and developed. Tommy here is living proof that when we offer love, structure, and genuine opportunities, extraordinary miracles can happen. The most symbolic and emotional moment of the inauguration came when Jordan and Tommy, accompanied by Emma and the Williams family, stood before the large red ribbon that had been stretched across the main entrance of the Institute, surrounded by hundreds of people clapping and shouting words of encouragement and celebration. Tommy, who just a few weeks earlier had been a desperate and abandoned child, was now elegantly dressed and carried himself with an impressive confidence and dignity for his age, clearly transformed not only externally, but also internally by the experience of being loved, valued, and invested in by adults who believed in his extraordinary potential. Jordan handed Tommy a large decorative scissor, symbolizing that the Institute truly belonged to the children who would benefit from it, and together they cut the ribbon as Emma clapped excitedly, and the crowd erupted in deafening celebration. The ribbon cutting was not just a ceremonial formality, but a deeply symbolic moment representing the opening of doors of opportunity for hundreds of children who would finally have access to education, medical care, proper nutrition, professional training, and most importantly, an environment where they would be treated with dignity, respect, and unconditional love. When the doors of the Institute officially opened and the first children began to enter to explore their new facilities, Tommy felt an indescribable sense of pride, gratitude, and purpose, knowing that his personal experience of suffering had been transformed into a source of hope and inspiration for others. Mr. Jordan, thank you for teaching me that our pain can become our strength, and that when we overcome our own hardships, we gain the power to help others overcome theirs too. This institute will save hundreds of lives, and it all started because you decided to stop and listen to the cry for help from two desperate children. After the official inauguration ceremony, Jordan invited Tommy to give an impromptu speech to the gathered crowd, an opportunity the boy embraced with surprising maturity and eloquence that demonstrated how his difficult experiences had forged in him a wisdom far beyond his chronological years. Tommy climbed onto a small platform that had been prepared for the speeches, adjusted the microphone to his height, and looked at the sea of hopeful faces watching him with attention and respect, including many children his own age who were living on the streets and saw in him tangible proof that extraordinary transformations are possible even in the most desperate circumstances. His words were carefully chosen to be inspiring but honest, acknowledging the real pain that many of those children were facing, while offering genuine hope based on his own experience of radical transformation. He spoke about the importance of never giving up on dreams, even when everything seems impossible, about the power of accepting help from genuine people when it is offered, and about the responsibility everyone has to reach out to help others when they reach a position of stability and success. His voice grew in intensity and emotion as he addressed directly the street children in the audience, many of whom were openly crying upon hearing their own experiences reflected in Tommy's courageous words. My friends who are still living on the cold streets of Chicago, I want you to know that I understand exactly how you feel, because just a month ago, I was exactly like you, desperate and abandoned. But today I'm here to tell you that real second chances exist, that good people exist, and that each of you has extraordinary potential waiting to be discovered. This institute is proof that when one person decides to make a difference, they can change not just one life, but hundreds of lives, and you deserve all the opportunities this place offers. After Tommy's moving speech, which received a standing ovation of a full 5 minutes from the deeply touched crowd, Jordan organized a special symbolic activity that would be remembered by everyone present as the most emotional and significant moment of the entire inauguration. He took Emma, now fully recovered and radiant with health and happiness, to one of the covered basketball courts, where he had prepared a hoop adjusted to the height of a 4-year-old child, and in front of hundreds of emotional spectators, he invited her to make the first official shot on the Institute's court. Emma, dressed in her pink dress and white shoes, held the small basketball with her delicate little hands, focused intensely for a few seconds with the comical seriousness of a small child trying to do something important, and then shot the ball, which flew in a perfect arc and went cleanly into the basket, triggering an explosion of applause, cheers, and celebration that echoed throughout the entire complex of the Institute. Jordan lifted her into his arms and spun her in the air, as she laughed delightfully, a moment of pure joy that perfectly symbolized the complete transformation that had occurred in the lives of the two children and in Jordan's own perspective on his life purpose. Emma's shot wasn't just a cute moment for the cameras, but a powerful symbol that even the smallest and seemingly most fragile people can achieve extraordinary things when given the right support, encouragement, and opportunities. As he watched Emma celebrate her successful basket, Jordan felt a profound sense of accomplishment and purpose that surpassed any victory he had achieved during his legendary professional basketball career. Emma, my brave little princess, that shot symbolizes that you and Tommy have overcome all the obstacles life put in your way. Now you are the inspiration for hundreds of other children who will walk through these doors looking for their own second chances. In the months following the historic inauguration of the Jordan Second Chance Institute, Tommy fully settled into his unique role as a young ambassador and source of inspiration for the dozens of children who arrived weekly at the Institute seeking shelter, education, and hope for a better future. He divided his time between his regular studies at an excellent private school that the Williams had carefully chosen for him, his responsibilities as the Institute's official representative at public events and media interviews, and most importantly, his direct volunteer work with the newly arrived children who needed to hear from someone who had lived their experiences that real transformations were possible. Every afternoon after school, Tommy went to the Institute where he conducted basketball sessions for groups of children of various ages, teaching not only the technical fundamentals of the sport, but also life lessons about perseverance, teamwork, discipline, and the importance of setting ambitious yet achievable goals. Emma, now a healthy and happy 5-year-old child, often accompanied Tommy to the Institute, where she became a sort of beloved mascot and living symbol that even the most desperate situations can have happy endings when the right people get involved with genuine compassion and adequate resources. Jordan regularly observed the Institute's activities and was constantly impressed by Tommy's maturity, natural leadership, and ability to emotionally connect with children going through traumas similar to those he had faced, demonstrating an extraordinary wisdom and empathy clearly forged through his own difficult but transformative experiences. Watching Tommy teach basketball to these children makes me realize that sometimes when we save a child, they end up saving the world by becoming a source of hope and inspiration for hundreds of others. He proved that every child on the streets has a Michael Jordan within them. They just need a genuine chance to flourish. During a particularly special afternoon, exactly 1 year after the day Tommy had desperately run through the icy streets of Chicago, carrying Emma who was dying, Jordan visited the Institute and found Tommy in the main gym, conducting a training session for 15 children aged 8 to 12, all of them newly enrolled in the program, and still carrying in their eyes the same mix of fear, hope, and determination that he himself had shown on that terrible night that changed everything. Tommy had grown several inches over the year, developed defined muscles through regular basketball training, and more importantly, cultivated a natural confidence and leadership charisma that made the other children instinctively respect and trust him as someone who truly understood their struggles and believed in their potential. Jordan positioned himself discreetly in the gym bleachers and silently observed as Tommy demonstrated shooting techniques, offered personalized encouragement to each child, and shared inspiring stories about how basketball had helped him focus his mind and channel his emotions during the most difficult periods of his transition from life on the streets to family stability. The scene was deeply touching and symbolically powerful, representing the full cycle of transformation that had begun with a desperate cry for help in the early morning and evolved into a systematic social change program that had already positively impacted more than 200 children in just 12 months of operation. As he watched Tommy work with passion and genuine dedication, Jordan whispered to himself the words that had become the Institute's unofficial motto and the philosophy guiding all the work done there. Sometimes we save a child, but they end up saving the whole world through the example of courage, determination, and unconditional love they offer to everyone around them. Tommy proved that every child abandoned on the streets has a Michael Jordan within them. They just need a genuine chance to discover and develop their extraordinary potential. The story of Tommy and Emma Williams became an inspiring legend in Chicago and far beyond, perfectly symbolizing the core values of compassion, second chances, and social responsibility that Michael Jordan had always carried in his heart, but had rediscovered through the transformative encounter with two desperate children who changed his perspective on the true meaning of success and personal fulfillment. The Jordan Second Chance Institute grew and thrived in the following years, expanding its facilities and programs to accommodate hundreds of children annually, offering not only temporary shelter and basic care, but also college-quality education, professional training in multiple areas, mentoring programs with successful professionals, and most importantly, a structured environment where every child was treated with dignity, respect, and unconditional love regardless of their background or past circumstances. Tommy continued serving as the Institute's official young ambassador throughout his teenage years, while excelling academically at an elite preparatory school and developing his basketball skills to the point of receiving full scholarship offers from several prestigious universities, proving that abandoned children can not only survive, but thrive extraordinarily when given the right opportunities and support. Emma grew into an intelligent, caring, and socially conscious young woman who frequently accompanied Tommy in his activities at the Institute, serving as a constant reminder that even the most desperate situations can have incredibly happy endings when the right people get involved with generous hearts and adequate resources. The central message of this entire transformative journey resonated far beyond the borders of Chicago, inspiring the creation of similar programs in cities across the country and definitively proving that every child on the streets truly has a Michael Jordan within them, just waiting for a genuine chance to be discovered, developed, and celebrated. If the journey of Michael Jordan, Tommy, and Emma touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and discover now the next moving story we've prepared for you. See you soon. And before you leave, comment where you're watching from and tell me, what did you think of the ending of this story?